welcome to Fish for Fallen Light. This is the fourth edition, chapter of this experimental poetry podcast in which I speak to poet and writer friends about their favorite poems. This is one I've wanted to share for a while, and I apologize for it taking so long to get another one of these out. It's been a couple of 2 weeks, but I'll get to that a little bit later on. This episode features a poem I was not familiar with, and a poem that has just made an incredibly powerful impact. A poem that I have since I recorded this episode probably 3 weeks ago. I've probably shared this poem with family and friends on Zoom calls and other settings because it's just a poem that is just so right for our times, and certainly a poem that deserves to be better known and better shared. It's a poem by Eric Gamalinda. It's going to knock your socks off. But I will let our featured poet, my good friend Laurie Ann Guerrero, she is in San Antonio, Texas, and I had actually just seen her. I'd spent a couple of days with her in San Antonio right before the lockdown happened, 2 months ago now. It seems hard to believe. Anyway, Laurie Ann is an amazing poet and teacher, and it's just a delight to talk to her. As always, you'll get a sense of her and her work. She was the San Antonio Poet Laureate. She was the Texas Poet Laureate. So she has written a number of books, has a book that's about to come out, which you'll hear a little bit more about from her. Anyway, I want to get out of the way of this great poem and this conversation. So without further ado, let's go to Laurie Ann. Hi, Laurie Ann.
Hi, Dan.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
How are things in what's the weather like in San Antonio?
We've been having some gray days. Occasionally we'll get a nice sunny day and I take my kids to the park. But it's been pretty gray. It's been a little rainy and drizzly, which is nice. Yeah. I kind of like it.
Nice. And I am reaching you in your study, in your office?
Yeah, in my studio downstairs, yeah.
Nice.
Where I write and I paint and do my things.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining me on this experimental, what I'm saying, semi-regular podcast. My idea was just to chat with people about their favorite poems. And I understand you had a couple of, we all have favorite poems. You had a couple of poems that you were thinking about. Yeah. Which one did you decide to share today?
Well, I wanted to say I watched Sheila and David do their interview with you, or share their poems, and it was so great. And I'm grateful that you're doing this, and I'm grateful to be asked to participate. I had originally thought of my favorite poem, one that sort of has been living with me that I've been living with for a very long time, and that has been very pivotal in my life at different changes and transitions in my life, and that's The Journey by Mary Oliver. Huh. But I chose to share a poem by Eric Gamalinda called No Fly Zone, which, again, another poem that has that I've lived with sort of throughout, the last at least 10 years. I think 10 years, about 10 years.
Right.
And so this is his book. This is the book it comes from, Amigo Warfare.
Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful poem. So we'll talk about it a little bit after I read it.
Sure, great.
Okay. So, No Fly Zone.
Okay.
Whatever form you imagine your worst fear, if the zigzag of sunlight on the stoop profoundly disturbs you, no matter how much bitterness your earliest memory casts onto your dinner plate, whether you come from a country of refugees or xenophobes, whether you sleep on the right side of the bed or the left with a man or a woman, in whatever language you articulate your desire. Even if tanks roll out of armories, looking for the dead center of mothers' hearts, or in a city somewhere, someone broods under a lamp and pronounces a few words that could have saved a life. Until the earth implodes with industry and volcanoes sputter their last reproach. No matter who you were 2 weeks ago, no matter what voluntary evil lurked in your heart when you woke this morning and you smoked a cigarette in the rain and someone's name tasted like blood on your lips, I am glad to share this lifetime with you. There is no other planet where the cultivation of souls is possible. None that we know of. May the happiness of others protect you. May you find the flashing exit signs at the turnpikes of suffering and a coin to buy your way out of hell.
Wow, that is.
Yeah.
I'm kind of speechless. That's that doesn't sound like a 10-year-old poem. That feels like
I know.
Do you remember when you first came across it?
I read this book when I was in grad school. Gosh, probably maybe in 2009, maybe I read it. I'm looking for that. Yeah, maybe in 2009 or 8, I read this book. But I'm in grad school, you're reading so many books and you're writing so much. And so this poem didn't really hit me until I think it was December of 2015, after the Sandy Hook shooting. I believe it was 2015.
Yeah.
And this poem sort of became this. So this poem could say the things that I couldn't as a mother. That struggle between wanting to be empathetic, wanting to have compassion, wanting to be the best kind of citizen and mother, and but also having that struggle, the tension of being human, of feeling this anger, and that last line in the poem, a coin to buy your way out of hell. Yeah, I feel like that just it anchors everything in the reality that we are human, and no matter how much compassion or how much empathy you want to or you're trying to cultivate, there's the evil in ourselves, right? That evil and that desire for someone else to suffer the way that they have made us suffer.
Wow. I'm so glad you chose this poem. I mean, I'm a huge Mary Oliver fan, but this poem just speaks so much to the moment we're living in. And yet, thinking about Sandy Hook being 5 years ago, it feels, I mean, I've been joking that we're living in dog years now, but because so much is happening all the time, but it's hard to believe that was 5 years ago.
And I think it might have been longer than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It might have been 2012 that Sandy Hook happened.
Oh, yeah.
I might be getting my dates confused. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, do you remember like what it was that sort of like brought you back to it? I mean,
I remember that that every mass shooting that we've had to endure, I think the struggle as a mom, knowing that my kids are out in the world, and my son in New York, my daughter in Austin, and I've got my baby here at home. But every time something would happen, I have adult children and they're out in the world and they're going to clubs or they're going to parties or they're in school, and that every time something happened in our country, it felt like it was personal. It was very personal.
Yeah.
And so every time I always return to this poem, and because I struggle like any human, with wanting to be empathetic, with wanting to understand the mentality, the history that creates this kind of hate, wanting to understand it so that I can be empathetic, and also like turning inward and wanting to understand my own prejudices and my own shit, so that I can be empathetic. So every time something like this would happen in our country, of course I would write, I would journal, I would think through, talk with people, and try to understand. And then having conversations with my kids about it, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
And so when people ask me about what is my favorite poem, I always think of Mary Oliver, because that one was pivotal in my making huge decisions, going back to school as a mother, moving across the country to go to school, things like that. But the poem that reminds me that it's okay to be human is this one. And so when we were talking about favorite poems, I do think about this one, and so I was reading it again, just this, since you had mentioned you wanted to do this, so I pulled this poem back out, and one of the things that I'm working on in the book that I'm working right now is this idea of empathy, and how we struggle with it, And so this poem, reading it again now, what we're going through now, it's one of those poems.
I like asking people how the poem has changed over time, but it seems to me, I imagine even in grad school with everything you're reading, it clearly had enough of an impact that you kept the book, because we don't always keep all the books that we were assigned in grad school.
Yeah.
But in some ways, like, the time itself kind of embodied the poem, and just the idea, I think about sort of like poems that there's this kind of bitterness involved in the fact that a poem like this has to, this bitterness about sort of living in a world where a poem like this is constantly necessary, or repeatedly being like, you want to live in a world where a poem like this isn't necessary, and yet, like you said, all these mass shootings, all these events, they feel personal because they're all in places that are recognizable, but I was curious, like, have you had an opportunity to think about how this poem might speak for the time we're living in now, or is it
well
too...
I was thinking about this a lot because, like I said, I had pulled this book out, I don't know, a week or 2 weeks ago, again, to look at this poem. And, right now, we're all quarantined and we're all, doing our best to, like, get out of bed, make meals and whatnot. And before we sort of were self-distancing and whatnot, it was really hard because I was dealing with my son in New York, and what is the best way to get him home? Do I just get in my truck and go get him? Do I put him in an airplane? Do I bring him home and quarantine him away from my daughters? Do I put him in a room alone? What do I do?
Those are real considerations that people are having everywhere. Yeah.
Right. And when he came home, we decided to fly him home. He came home on March the 19th, left all his stuff in his dorm. They canceled his commencement. He's home. But we were going to pick him up. His dad and I were going to pick him up. And we didn't know, do we hug him? What do we do? But he's my baby. And I jumped out of the truck and threw my arms around him. And, he's a 22-year-old young man. Brought him home, and carried on life like Drew's home. It's fine. But I say this because I was just desperately wanting my baby home, all of my babies, but now I'm, gosh, I've been for 3 weeks, and I've got 2 adult children and a 15-year-old, and there's a lot of opinions and a lot of loud, big personalities, and so it's hard. It's hard to all 4 of us here quarantine together, and so I feel guilty because I need a break from it. I need a break, and so now I say all of this because you asked me about this poem. Now I read this poem, yesterday, day before yesterday, like it reminds me that I have to have empathy for myself, that I have to have compassion toward myself, that I am human. And so that's been a real, that's something that I'm struggling with now, because I'm lucky that my babies are home. I'm lucky that my son got out of New York in time. He's healthy, we're healthy. So I feel guilty wanting a break from it. Mm-hmm. But I know other parents are too, I'm sure, so anyway.
Well, in the midst of this, thanks so much for sharing this poem. It's powerful. I wasn't familiar with it, and I'm so glad that you've brought it into my life. And I don't know how many people are going to watch this, but I can only imagine that people are going to be reaching for the poem. The title again of the I just want to give
it's No Fly Zone is the name of the poem. And the book is Amigo Warfare.
Warfare.
By Eric Gamalinda.
Yeah. All right. And the publisher? Who's the?
Cherry Grove.
Okay, great. I will try to include information down below. I've been telling people the couple of podcasts that I've listened to. Do you have anything to plug?
Not really. I have a book coming out in the fall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The new and collected. It's called I Have Eaten the Rattlesnake, with Texas Christian University Press.
Nice.
There's no date yet, and now with everything, who knows when. But it's supposed to be in the fall. And Martina Espada wrote the foreword, which I'm really excited about.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Laurie Ann. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you for what you're doing. You are a blessing.
It's it's been a blessing all around. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Wow. I wasn't kidding, right? I don't know what else to say. I want to thank Laurie Ann Guerrero for sharing that wonderful poem, for spending some time with me, and that wonderful poem by Eric Gamalinda. I should also let you know that I reached out to Eric Gamalinda, and just to let him know that we were featured. Well, that's my little computer chirping up. But I reached out to Eric Gamalinda just to let him know that we were going to be featuring his poem, and wanted to make sure that was okay. And he just said he was happy to see the poem out there. So anyway, I'm going to link to a place online where that poem can be found and shared. So anyway, I'm going to end the way I usually end, which is by reciting the short poem that really inspired the title for this podcast, Fish for Fallen Light. But before I do, I want to say some of the hardness of the last couple of weeks has been finding the ways in which COVID is affecting so many people and the people that we've lost. And the writing community has lost a really remarkable um, writer and educator and human being, lover of art in Ache Carrillo. Ache Carrillo was the author of an amazing book called Losing My Spanish, which, if you haven't read that book, it's just it's a must read. And if you're looking for books to read during this closure, really at any time, I can't recommend it highly enough. Anyway, Ache died due to complications from COVID, and about 2 weeks ago now. And so I wanted to end with a piece from the end of Losing My Spanish. Um, to battle good, be good at battle, battle evil, or battle the evil that's good. Um, I know I didn't know him very well, but every time that I saw him and spent time with him, and the ways in which he reached out when my last book was coming out, he just had this kind of very open-hearted, helpful, generous spirit. And I know just the little interaction I had with him and the impact that he had in those interactions. I can only imagine how much his students, he taught at George Washington University and a number of other places, just the ache that his death, the loss, must be powerful. So I know there are many other people who we've lost, and I hope everyone can stay safe wherever they are. We have been in lockdown. I should say part of the population has been in lockdown the last couple of weeks, couple of months for some. There are some states that are reopening, and I think a lot of us have loved ones in those states, in those areas, and are chilled to the bone to think that the leadership in those states is acting so recklessly and so inhumanely to move people to not shelter in place when we are not out of the woods. And so, uh, anyway, I want to recommit myself to bringing these conversations to you. I've done a couple of other interviews I'd like to get out in the last couple of weeks, and I know I've done these about a week at a time, but I'd like to get a few more of them out as I can. I did a really lovely interview with some technical problems, but I did a lovely interview and had a wonderful conversation with Marilyn Nelson, in which she shared an amazing poem that many of us know, but that is also ripe for reemergence in this period. So I'm going to try to get that one out. Also, a wonderful conversation with my good friend Terry Cross Davis. So anyway, that's all forthcoming. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, which is the easiest way of finding out if new things are up, or on Facebook, there's a Facebook page, and I'm trying to post to both places. Please do so. Please share as you'd like. If you find this helpful and something useful to share, to repost and to, I don't know. I put this out there. I have no idea how far it will go. So anyway, the poem that inspired this still speaks to me some 30 years after it first entered my life. It is an untitled poem, one of the last poems written by the great poet from Chile, Pablo Neruda, and it goes like this. If each day falls inside each night, there exists a well where clarity lies imprisoned. we must sit at the rim of the well of darkness and fish for fallen light with patience. Si cada día cae dentro de cada noche, existe un pozo donde la oscuridad está imprisionado. Tenemos que sentarnos a la orilla del pozo de la oscuridad y pescar por luz caída con paciencia. Take care, be well, hold on to each other in whatever way we can.